The snow fell like forgiveness I would never receive. I was 8 years old the night my pack decided I wasn't worth the warmth of their fires. My name was Kira Ashford, and I was the daughter of no one who mattered. My mother died, bringing me into this world, a fact the Iron Peak Pack never let me forget. They whispered it in hallways, spat it at me in training yards, carved it into my soul with every cruel glance and dismissive word. She killed her own mother, cursed from birth. My father was a Lorenkin warrior named Thomas Ash. He had been strong once, they said. Honorable, brave. But my mother's death shattered something inside him that never healed. He turned to alcohol, drowning his grief in bottles he stole from pack stores, stumbling through his god shifts until Alpha Garas finally stripped him of his rank and position. He died 3 winters after my mother, his liver giving out in the middle of a February snowstorm. I was 5 years old. I remember standing at his funeral in the pack cemetery, a tiny figure in an oversized black dress someone had donated from the charity bin. The dress hung off my shoulders like a shroud. My bare feet were blue with cold against the frozen ground. I remember the way the pack members looked at me as they filed past his grave, not with sympathy or kindness, but with disgust and barely concealed contempt. Orphaned, wolfless, broken, cursed. After the funeral, I was sent to live in the orphan lodge. The lodge was a rotting wooden cabin perched at the very edge of Iron Peak territory, as far from the main pack house as physically possible. It was where unwanted children were kept out of sight and out of mind, a dumping ground for the weak, the damaged, the ones the pack considered expendable. The building itself was falling apart. The roof leaked when it rained. The windows were cracked and covered with plastic sheeting. The floorboards creaked and sagged under our weight. In winter, frost formed on the inside of the walls. The lodge was run by an elderly Omega named Marta, a woman with tired gray eyes and a voice worn thin by years of trying to care for too many children with too few resources. She did her best, but her best was never enough. The pack gave her barely enough food to keep us alive, barely enough firewood to keep us from freezing, and no support whatsoever. There were 12 of us crammed into that 3-room cabin. We slept on thin mattresses laid directly on the floor, sharing blankets that were more holes than fabric. We ate watery vegetable soup and stale bread for every meal. We wore donated clothes that didn't fit properly, and shoes with holes in the soles that let in snow and mud. But the physical deprivation wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence. No one from the pack ever visited us. No one asked how we were doing. No one cared if we were hungry or cold or scared. We existed in a state of complete abandonment. Invisible ghosts on the edge of pack territory. And among all the forgotten children in that lodge, I was the most forgotten of all. Because I had no wolf. In the world of werewolves, your wolf is everything. It's your strength, your identity, your connection to the moon goddess and the pack. It's the core of who you are. Most werewolf children experience their first shift between the ages of 6 and 8, their wolves emerging in a blaze of instinct and joy and belonging. I watched it happen to the other orphans, one by one, and each time it felt like another nail in my coffin. Marcus shifted at 7 years old, his wolf a sleek brown creature with bright amber eyes and a confident stride. A warrior family claimed him the very next day, eager to have a strong young male to train. Lila shifted at 6, her wolf small but fierce, with gorgeous red-gold fur. The pack healer adopted her within a week. Even little Toby, the youngest and most fragile of us, shifted at 8 years old and was immediately taken in by an Omega family who had lost their own son to illness the previous winter. One by one, the other children shifted and were claimed and left the lodge for better lives. But not me. Primera wa aitit. I prayed every single night to the moon goddess, begging her to give me my wolf, to make me whole, to prove to the pack that I wasn't broken or cursed. But the goddess never answered, and the pack's patience, what little there had been, ran out. It started with whispers. She's hollow, empty inside, a mistake of nature. Then came the open insults. Pack children threw rocks at me when I walked through the village. Warriors shoved me aside when I accidentally crossed their paths. Even Marta, kind Marta, who had cared for me since my father's death, began to look at me with something that felt uncomfortably close to pity, which somehow hurt worse than outright hatred. And then came the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, the night that changed everything. The entire pack gathered in the great clearing for the moon ceremony, a sacred ritual held every solstice where we honored the goddess and celebrated our connection to our wolves. It was supposed to be a joyful occasion, full of howling and dancing and unity. I stood at the very back of the massive crowd, shivering violently in my threadbare coat, my bare feet completely numb against the frozen ground. I had no proper winter clothes. No one had thought to provide them. The ceremonial fire roared in the center of the clearing, flames leaping 20 feet into the air, casting dancing shadows across the snow and the surrounding pine trees. Alpha Garaf Stoneclaw stood at the head of the gathering, an imposing figure who commanded instant respect and fear. He was massive even by werewolf standards, standing well over 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders like a linebacker and arms thick with muscle. Silver streaked through his black hair despite his relative youth, a mark of the incredible stress of leading a pack of over 300 wolves. His eyes were the pale, cold blue of a winter sky, and when he looked at you, you felt it in your bones. He had ruled Iron Peak for 23 years, with an iron fist and zero tolerance for weakness or dissent. Beside him stood his mate, Luna Margot Stoneclaw. She was beautiful in the way a frozen waterfall is beautiful, absolutely flawless, utterly untouchable, and deadly if you got too close. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an intricate braid woven with silver thread. Her ice blue dress probably cost more than the orphan lodge's entire annual budget. She looked at the assembled pack with cool assessment, her gaze sliding over the lower-ranked wolves as if we were barely worth noticing. Elder Rohan stepped forward, raising his gnarled age-spotted hands toward the blood-red moon rising above the mountains. "Great moon goddess Selene," he intoned, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "We honor you this sacred night. We give thanks for the wolves you have blessed us with. We ask for your continued guidance, your strength, your wisdom as we face the challenges of the coming year." The entire pack howled in response, hundreds of voices rising together in perfect harmony, a sound so beautiful and powerful it made my chest physically ache with longing. I wanted desperately to howl with them, but I had no wolf to give voice to, so I stood in silence, an 8-year-old girl alone in a crowd of hundreds, and felt the weight of my inadequacy crushing down on me. Before we continue this journey into one of Colorado's darkest and most emotional stories of fate and rebirth, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. And if this is your first time on our channel, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear is a story that legends tried to hide, but memory refused to forget. After the howling ended and the ceremonial songs were sung, Elder Rohan called for silence with a sharp gesture. "There is a matter of grave importance we must address tonight," he announced, and I felt my stomach drop even before his eyes found me in the crowd. Every head turned to stare. "The child Kira Ashford has lived among us for 8 years," Elder Rohan continued, his voice carrying across the silent clearing. "She has been given shelter under our roofs, food from our stores, and the protection of this pack's name and strength. And yet, despite all we have provided, the moon goddess has not seen fit to bless her with a wolf." Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd like a wave. "A wolfless child is a curse upon the pack," Elder Rohan declared, his voice rising with righteous conviction. "She drains our precious resources that could go to strong wolves. She weakens our bloodline. She brings shame and dishonor to Iron Peak and insults the goddess herself with her very existence." "No," I whispered, but my voice was lost in the growing noise of agreement from the pack. "I propose," Elder Rohan said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "that we release her from the pack bonds. Let her find her fate beyond our borders, in the wilderness where the weak are called naturally. If the goddess truly has some purpose for this child, she will survive the mountain's test. If not, he shrugged carelessly. Then we will have our answer, and Iron Peak will be stronger for her absence." The crowd erupted, Some wolves shouted immediate agreement, their faces twisted with disgust as they looked at me. Others shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away from my small, trembling form, but they said nothing in my defense. A few of the Omegas looked vaguely sympathetic, but they were too low-ranked to speak against an elder's proposal. Not one single wolf stood up for me. I looked desperately at Marta, silently begging her to say something, anything, but she just stared at the ground, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. I looked at the warriors who had known my father, who had fought beside Thomas Ashford before the drink destroyed him, but they turned their backs. Finally, I looked directly at Alpha Garath, silently pleading with him to see me as something more than a burden, to remember that I was just a child. Our eyes met for one brief, terrible moment. Then he looked away. "The child has been given every opportunity to prove her worth," Luna Margot said, her voice soft and gentle and dripping with false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "If after 8 full years she still cannot shift, cannot access her wolf, cannot contribute to the pack in even the smallest way, then perhaps Elder Rohan is correct. Perhaps she simply does not belong among us." "The decision is made," Alpha Garath said, his tone flat and final and absolute. "Kira Ashford will be taken beyond the northern border at first light and released to face the mountain's judgment alone. This is the will of Iron Peak, and it shall be done. No trial, no defense, no chance to speak in my own defense. Just a death sentence delivered with cold efficiency and dressed up as mercy." The world tilted sickeningly beneath my feet, my vision blurred with tears. I refused to let fall. My chest felt like it was caving in. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to beg them on my hands and knees to give me just a little more time. But my voice had been stolen years ago, beaten out of me by endless neglect and casual cruelty. So I stood there in absolute silence, a tiny 80-year-old figure barely visible in the crowd, while the pack that was supposed to protect me decided I wasn't worth the effort. They came for me in the hours before dawn, when the world was still dark and frozen. I was dragged from my thin mattress by 2 large warriors. I didn't recognize massive men with cold, dead eyes and expressions that said they'd done this kind of thing before and felt nothing about it. The other orphans watched from their beds as I was hauled out of the lodge, their faces pale and frightened in the dim lamplight. A few of the younger ones were crying quietly. No one said goodbye. No one tried to stop it. They simply watched as I disappeared into the darkness. The warriors threw me roughly into the back of a battered pickup truck, the metal bed lined with a thin layer of frost that immediately soaked through my thin clothes. I curled into myself instinctively, trying desperately to preserve what little body heat I had left. My breath came out in visible white clouds that dissipated into the freezing air. The truck's engine rumbled to life with a cough and a roar, and we began the long, brutal climb up into the Colorado Rockies. I pressed my face against the cold metal and watched through the truck's rear window as Iron Peak slowly disappeared behind us, the warm golden lights of the pack house growing smaller and smaller, the smoke rising from dozens of chimneys, the solid walls that had never truly protected me. I was leaving behind the only home I had ever known. And I understood, with the terrible clarity that sometimes comes to children facing death, that I would never see it again. The truck climbed higher into the mountains for what felt like hours. I watched the landscape transform through gaps in the truck bed's sides. The dense forests of Iron Peak's territory gave way to sparse, twisted pines that grew at impossible angles from rocky soil. The air grew thinner, colder, sharper. Snow began to fall in thick, heavy flakes that accumulated rapidly on every surface. We were heading into the true wilderness, the part of the Rockies where even experienced werewolf hunters rarely ventured, where the cold could kill you in hours, where mountain lions, bears, and rogue wolf packs ruled territories with savage efficiency. It was a death sentence, and everyone involved knew it. Finally, after what must have been 3 or 4 hours of driving, the truck shuddered to a stop in the middle of nowhere. One of the warriors jumped out and opened the tailgate with a screech of protesting metal. He grabbed my arm in a grip that would leave bruises and dragged me out, dropping me unceremoniously into a snowdrift that came up to my waist. I looked around desperately, trying to get my bearings. We were in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines so thick I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The snow was pristine and untouched. No tracks, no signs of life, nothing but endless white silence. The wind howled through the trees like the voices of ghosts, carrying away any sound I might have made. "This is where you get off." "Hello," the warrior said, his voice completely devoid of emotion or sympathy. I looked up at him, my lips trembling as I tried desperately to form words that simply wouldn't come. My voice had abandoned me completely. "Please, please don't leave me here. Please, I'll try harder. I'll be better. Just please, don't leave me alone." But the plea died unspoken in my throat. The warrior didn't wait for a response he knew wouldn't come. He simply climbed back into the truck, slammed the door, and within seconds the vehicle was rumbling back down the mountain, leaving me standing alone in the clearing. I watched the tire tracks slowly fill with fresh snow, erasing all evidence that anyone had ever been there. Then I was truly alone. For a long time, I simply stood there, frozen in place by shock and terror more than by the actual cold. My mind couldn't fully process what had just happened. Some part of me kept expecting someone to come back, to tell me this was all a test or a mistake or a cruel joke. Surely they wouldn't actually abandon an 8-year-old child in the wilderness to die. Surely someone would realize how wrong this was and come back for me. But as minutes turned into an hour and the snow continued to fall and my feet went completely numb inside my thin shoes, reality began to sink in. No one was coming back. I was on my own. If I wanted to survive, primera had to move. So I started walking. I had no idea where I was going or what I was looking for. I just knew with animal instinct that standing still meant freezing to death. And some stubborn part of me, some tiny spark of defiance buried deep in my chest, refused to give the pack that satisfaction. I stumbled forward through the snow, my small legs sinking deep with every step, my body already beginning to shake violently from the cold. The cold was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my short life. It wasn't just uncomfortable or unpleasant, it was alive. A predator stalking me with infinite patience. It crept through my thin clothes and invaded my skin, my muscles, my bones. It filled my lungs with every breath, making each inhale feel like swallowing knives. It turned my fingers and toes first numb, then burning with agony, then completely dead to sensation. I walked for hours, though time lost all meaning in that white wilderness. The sun never fully rose, just a vague gray lightning of the sky that did nothing to warm the frozen world. The snow fell heavier until I could barely see 3 feet in front of my face. The wind picked up, howling like wounded animals, cutting through my clothes like they didn't exist. I fell more times than I could count, my legs simply giving out beneath me. Each time it got harder to stand back up. Each time I stayed down a little longer, my body begging me to just stop, to rest, to close my eyes and let the cold take me. But I kept getting up. I kept walking. I thought about my mother as I stumbled through the snow, the woman whose face I had never seen, whose voice I had never heard. Did she know what would happen to me when she died, bringing me into this world? Did she regret it? Or did she die, hoping I would have a better life than this? I thought about my father, the broken man who couldn't bear to look at me because I reminded him too much of what he'd lost. Did he ever love me, even a little? Or was I always just a burden he tolerated until the alcohol finally gave him an escape? I thought about the pack Alpha Garad's cold dismissal, Luna Margot's false sympathy, Elder Rowan's righteous condemnation, and all the wolves who had stood silent while they sentenced a child to death. And I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I am broken. Maybe I am cursed. Maybe the world really would be better off if I just stopped existing. My legs gave out one final time, and I didn't have the strength to get back up. I collapsed face first into the snow, too exhausted to even turn over, too cold to feel anything anymore. The sky above me was a uniform gray, the snowflakes falling faster now, beginning to cover me like a burial shroud. I closed my eyes, and I waited for death to take me. But death had other plans. I don't know how long I lay there in the snow. Minutes, hours. Time had stopped having any meaning. But then something changed. It felt warmth, not from an external source, not from the sun breaking through clouds or someone finding me or a fire being lit nearby, but from inside me. A spark deep in my chest, growing stronger with every heartbeat. My eyes snapped open. The sky had transformed completely. The gray clouds had parted like curtains being drawn back, and above me, impossibly bright against the twilight, hung a moon unlike any I had ever seen. The blood moon. It was massive, 10 times larger than normal, and glowing with an intense crimson light that bathed the entire world in shades of red and shadow. It pulsed rhythmically, like a giant beating heart suspended in the heavens, and with each pulse I felt an answering surge of heat in my chest. And then I heard it. A voice. No, not quite a voice. More like a presence. An awareness. Something ancient and powerful and utterly beyond my understanding. It spoke directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. You are not broken, it said, and the words resonated in my bones. You are not cursed. You are not weak or worthless or hollow. You are mine, and it is time to wake up. My body convulsed violently, arching off the ground. Heat exploded through my veins like liquid fire, burning away the cold, burning away the numbness, burning away everything except raw primal power unlike anything I had ever imagined. My bones began to crack and reform with sounds like branches breaking. My spine elongated, my limbs twisted and reshaped themselves. My skin stretched and tore as something pushed its way out from inside me. I screamed. But the sound that tore from my throat was not human. It was a howl, deep and wild and filled with 8 years of rage and pain and loneliness given voice for the very first time. The transformation ripped through me like a tornado, violent and unstoppable and absolutely terrifying. And when it finally ended, I stood on 4 legs in the crimson-lit snow, and everything had changed. I was a wolf, my wolf, the one the pack said would never come. I looked down at my paws, massive and powerful, with fur as white as fresh snow. I turned my head and caught sight of my reflection in a patch of ice and barely recognized what I saw. My wolf was beautiful, pure white fur that seemed to glow with its own inner light, eyes that shone like molten silver, a body lean and strong and built for speed and survival. I was larger than most female wolves, though not quite as big as the adult males I'd seen in Iron Peak. But it wasn't just my appearance that shocked me. It was the power. I could feel it thrumming through every cell of my body, strength I'd never possessed as a human, speed that made my previous life feel like moving through water, senses so sharp the world exploded into overwhelming detail. I could smell everything. The pine trees, the snow, the distant scent of elk moving through a valley miles away, even the fading exhaust from the truck that had abandoned me. I could hear the heartbeat of a rabbit hiding in its burrow 30 feet underground. I could hear the wind moving through individual pine needles. I could hear my own blood rushing through my veins. I could see in the darkness as clearly as if it were noon, every shadow defined, every movement visible. And most importantly, I wasn't cold anymore. My wolf form was built for this environment. My thick fur kept me warm. My paws distributed my weight perfectly across the snow. This wilderness that had been trying to kill me for hours suddenly felt like ... home. My wolf spoke to me for the first time, her voice confident and fierce inside my mind. Run, she said. We were meant for this. Run, so I ran. I bolted forward through the forest, my paws barely touching the ground, and it was like being reborn. Trees flashed past in blurs of brown and green. Snow kicked up behind me in clouds. The wind rushed through my fur. I was fast, impossibly fast. I was strong, powerful beyond anything I dreamed. I was free. For the first time in my entire life, I felt whole. I ran until the blood moon began to fade, and on approach, my wolf retreated gradually, the transformation reversing with significantly less pain than it had coming. Within minutes, I was human again, standing naked in a small clearing, my skin marked with strange silver patterns that glowed faintly in the pre-dawn light. The marks covered my shoulders, traced down my arms, curved across my ribs. They looked like ancient runes or tribal tattoos. Symbols I couldn't read, but somehow felt the meaning of deep in my bones. They were beautiful and terrifying. I had no idea what they meant or why they were there. All I knew was that I had changed fundamentally and irrevocably. The moon goddess Selene herself had marked me under the blood moon Primera wa Isenola. Kira Ashford, the hollow, broken, wolfless child. I was something else entirely. Something the pack couldn't have anticipated. Something they would never understand. But understanding myself would have to wait. First, I need to survive. I was naked, alone, and miles from any civilization, in the middle of the Colorado wilderness. Primera ade, no food, no shelter, no supplies of any kind. But I had my wolf now, and she would be enough. I shifted again, the transformation coming easier this time. Almost natural. My white wolf form materialized around me like slipping into a second skin. We need shelter, Primera told my wolf. And food. I know where to find both, she responded confidently. Trust me. So I did. Over the following weeks and months, I learned to survive in the wilderness. My wolf taught me things I never could have learned as a human. She showed me how to hunt, how to track rabbits and squirrels by scent, how to move silently through the forest, how to kill quickly and efficiently. She taught me which plants were safe to eat and which would make me sick. She taught me how to find water under ice and snow. I found shelter in a small cave system carved into the mountainside by ancient glaciers. It wasn't a mooch, just a series of connected chambers that stayed relatively dry and blocked the worst of the wind. But it was mine. I learned to make fire using friction and dried moss. I learned to preserve meat by smoking it over the flames. I learned to cure animal hides and use them for clothing and blankets. I learned to avoid the territories of larger predators, the mountain lions that hunted these slopes, the grizzly bears emerging from hibernation, the other wolf packs that would kill a lone wolf on sight for trespassing. I became a ghost in the wilderness, a phantom that hunters would occasionally glimpse but never catch, a white wolf that moved through the forests like smoke, leaving no trace except the occasional paw print in snow. Weeks turned into months, months turned into years, and I grew. By the time I turned 16, I had become something the Colorado wilderness whispered about in fear and wonder. The white wolf. Hunters told stories around their campfires of a phantom wolf with fur like moonlight and eyes that glowed like liquid silver. They said she moved without sound, appearing and disappearing like mist. They said she could vanish into thin air when cornered. They said she was a spirit, a ghost, a legend made flesh. Some claimed she was the guardian spirit of the mountains. Others said she was a curse, a demon sent to punish those who disrespected nature. A few even suggested she was a werewolf, though most dismissed that as superstition. They were all wrong. Was simply a survivor. But I was changing in ways that went beyond mere survival. My hair, once a dull mousy brown, had lightened over the years to a striking silver white that fell to my waist in waves. My eyes, formerly plain gray, now gleamed like polished silver even in human form. The mysterious marks that had appeared the night of my first shift had spread across my entire body, intricate silver patterns that glowed, faintly under moonlight, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I was taller now, leaner, stronger. My body had been sculpted by years of hunting and running and surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth. But more than my physical changes, something deeper was happening. I was developing abilities that shouldn't have been possible. I could sometimes hear thoughts from animals nearby, not words exactly, but emotions and intentions. I could feel the mood of the forest itself, sense approaching storms hours before they arrived, know instinctively which paths were safe and which were dangerous. The silver marks on my skin would sometimes flare with light when I was in danger, warning me of threats I couldn't see. I was becoming something more than just a werewolf primera vez, becoming something I didn't have a name for. And through all those years, through all that growth and change, there was one constant pull I could never quite escape. Home, no matter how far I ran or how deep into the wilderness. Primera ventured, something always pulled me back toward Iron Peak's borders. At first, I thought it was just nostalgia or unfinished business or the human need for closure. But my wolf knew better. Mate, she would whisper whenever we got close to pack territory. Our mate is there. I ignored her. I had no interest in mates or destiny or the cruel bonds that the moon goddess apparently found amusing to inflict on her children. The pack had taught me that I was unworthy of love, and I had learned that lesson well. Besides, whoever my supposed mate was, he had stood silent while they threw me away. He had done nothing while they sent an 8-year-old child to die in the snow. I wanted nothing to do with him but fate. I was learning, doesn't particularly care what you want. I was hunting on the northern border of Iron Peak territory when it happened. It was late autumn, and the first major snowstorm of the season was approaching. I could smell it in the air, feel it in the way the forest had gone quiet and tense. All the smart animals had already found shelter. I should have done the same, but I'd been tracking a large buck for 2 days, and I was determined not to let it escape. Winter was coming, and I needed the meat. I was so focused on my prey that I didn't notice the shift in the wind until it was too late. A scent hit me like a physical blow. Pine, smoke, steel, leather. And underneath it all, something deeper, something that made my wolf surge forward with desperate intensity, something that made my heart race and my chest ache with a longing I didn't understand. Mate, my wolf's voice was so loud and insistent, it made me stumble. No, not now, not here, not him. I forced my wolf down and stayed perfectly still, trying to pinpoint the source of the scent. There, through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, a lone figure stood at the edge of a frozen river. Even from this distance, even though I hadn't seen him in 8 years, I recognized him immediately. Riker Blackthorn Riker had been 15 years old when they exiled me, just a teenager, the son of one of Alpha Gareth's top warriors. I remembered him vaguely from pack gatherings, a tall boy with dark hair and serious eyes who always seemed to be watching everything with quiet intensity. But the male standing by the river now was no boy, had grown into something formidable. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with the broad shoulders and heavy muscle of a warrior in his prime. His dark hair was longer now, pulled back in a short tail at the nape of his neck. A vicious scar ran down the left side of his face from temple to jaw, a mark from some battle I hadn't witnessed. He wore the black leather jacket that marked him as one of Alpha Gareth's enforcers, the elite warriors who handled the pack's most dangerous and brutal work. And he was staring out at the frozen river with an expression of such profound grief and guilt that it made something in my chest twist painfully. But my wolf was going absolutely insane inside my head. Mate, go to him. Clam, im. He's ours, Datna, I told her firmly. He's one of them. He stood there and watched them throw us away. He did nothing. He was a child, so were we. My wolf fell silent, but I could feel her disagreement radiating through our bond. I turned to leave, to disappear back into the forest before he noticed me. But the wind shifted. Riker's POV, I'd been coming to this spot for 8 years. Every week, without fail, I stood at the edge of this frozen river and tried to convince myself that I'd done the right thing. Staying silent while they exiled an 8-year-old child had been the wise choice, that I'd been too young and powerless to make a difference. Anyway, that Kira Ashford's death wasn't my fault, but the guilt never faded. If anything, it had gotten worse over the years, growing like a cancer in my chest until some days I could barely breathe around it. I'd been promoted to enforcer at 18, youngest in pack history. I was good at my job, efficient, ruthless when necessary. Alpha Gareth trusted me with the pack's darkest work. But every time I carried out his orders, every time I used force to maintain pack law, I thought about that little girl with the gray eyes who'd never had anyone to fight for her, and I hated myself a little more. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost missed it, a shift in the wind, a scent wild untamed, powerful dot, and underneath it all, female dot, my wolf, who had been dormant and quiet for years, suddenly exploded to life. Mata mate mate. The word crashed through my mind like thunder, so loud and insistent I actually staggered. No, that wasn't possible. I spun toward the source of the scent, my eyes scanning the tree line desperately. There at a flash of white among the pines. A massive wolf with fur like fresh snow and eyes that glowed like molten silver. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and she was staring directly at me for one frozen moment. We simply looked at each other across the distance, the enforcer and the phantom. Then recognition hit me like a freight train. Those eyes. I knew those eyes, silver-gray, haunted familiar in a way that made my chest constrict painfully. Kira, I whispered, my voice rough with shock. The white wolf went absolutely still. You're supposed to be dead, I said, taking an involuntary step forward. They said you froze in the mountains. They said there was no way you could have survived. They said the wolf's lips pulled back in a snarl that stopped me cold, and then she bolted. One moment she was there, and the next she was just gone, disappearing into the forest like smoke. W-A-I-T, I shouted, already shifting into my own wolf form. Kira, wait, please. But she was already gone, and when I tried to follow her scent, it vanished completely, as if she'd never existed at all. I stood in the forest, my wolf whining desperately, and realized that my mate, the female the moon goddess had chosen for me, was the child I'd failed to save 8 years ago. The child whose death I'd been mourning ever since. Except she wasn't dead, she was alive, and she wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. Kira's POV, I ran faster and harder than I ever had before, pushing my wolf to her absolute limits, desperate to put as much distance between myself and Riker Blackthorn as physically possible. You're being foolish, my wolf said. He's our mate. We should go back. He watched them exile us, I snarled back. He stood there and did nothing while they sent an 8-year-old child to die. He was 15, a child himself, old enough to have a conscience, old enough to speak up. My wolf fell silent, but I could feel her sadness through our bond. I ran until my muscles burned and my lungs felt like they were on fire. I ran until I was so deep in the wilderness that even the most experienced hunters would never find me. And then I collapsed in a hidden valley I discovered years ago. My sides heaving, my heart racing. The mat bond was a living thing now, stretching between us like a cord of light I could actually feel tugging at my chest. It pulled constantly, insistently, trying to drag me back toward him. It was agony. Please, my wolf whimpered. Just talk to him. Give him a chance. No, you're hurting us both by fighting this. I don't care. But that was a lie. And we both knew it. Winter descended on the Rockies with unusual brutality that year. The temperatures dropped to dangerous levels even for werewolves. Snow fell in amounts that buried entire valleys. Prey became scarce as animals either migrated or went into hibernation. I'd survived worse before. I should have been fine, but something was wrong. I was getting weaker. At first, I thought it was just the harsh winter taking its toll, but as weeks passed, I realized it was something more. My wolf was fading. She moved slower each day. Her strength, which had always been reliable and constant, began to ebb like a tide going out. Some mornings I could barely shift at all. What's happening to us? I asked her one night, huddled in my cave, shivering despite my thick furs. She was quiet for a long moment. The bond, she finally said. We're rejecting our mate, and it's killing us. That's not possible, I said aloud, my voice hoarse from disuse. Plenty of wolves reject their mates and survive. Not wolves marked by the moon goddess, she said sadly. Not wolves like us. We were made for him, Kira. and he was made for us. Fighting that. It has consequences. I don't care, I whispered. I won't go back to him. I won't give them the satisfaction. Then we'll die, my wolf said simply. Is your pride worth our life? I didn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. The end came on a night when the temperature dropped below zero and a blizzard moved through the mountains with devastating force. I'd been too weak to hunt for 3 days. My food stores were depleted. My body was eating itself to stay alive. I should have shifted and tried to make it to lower elevations, where the weather was less severe. But I barely had the strength to stand, let alone run. So I curled up in the deepest part of my cave, wrapped in every fur I owned, and tried to stay warm as the storm raged outside. My wolf was barely conscious anymore. I could feel her slipping away, like water through my fingers. I'm sorry, I told her. I'm so sorry. Not your fault, she whispered. You were just trying to survive, like always. I should have been stronger, should have been able to let go of the past. Maybe in another life, she said. Maybe we'll get another chance. And then she was gone. The bond between us, the connection that had sustained me for 8 years, simply vanished. Was alone in my own head for the first time since the blood moon. And I was dying. I don't know how long I lay there. Hours, maybe days. Time lost all me. The cold that I'd been immune to for so long finally invaded my body, settling into my bones like an old enemy come home. My heartbeat slowed. My breathing became shallow. This was it. After surviving abandonment, after surviving the wilderness, after becoming something powerful and strange and unique, I was going to die alone in a cave, killed by my own stubborn pride. I'm sorry, Riker, I thought. Even though he couldn't hear me, I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to forgive you. My eyes closed and darkness took me. Riker's POV woke up screaming. The bond, which had been a constant ache in my chest for the past month, suddenly broke. One moment it was there, putting at me, and the next it was just gone, severed dead. No, I was out of bed and shifted before I was fully conscious. My wolf taking control with desperate urgency. Mate dying. Find her. Find air. I burst out of my cabin and ran north, following the bond's last whisper. Following instinct and desperation and the terror that I was too late, I found her 3 hours later, collapsed in the snow 1/2 mile from a cave system I'd never seen before. She was in human form, naked and freezing. Her silver hair spread around her like a halo. Her skin so pale it was almost translucent. She wasn't breathing. No, I whispered, dropping to my knees beside her and pulling her into my arms. No, Kira, please. Her body was ice. Her heartbeat was so faint I could barely detect it. She was dying, and it was my fault. I'm sorry, I said, pressing my forehead against hers, tears streaming down my face. I'm so sorry. I should have fought for you. I should have saved you. I should have been brave enough to stand up to them. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Don't talk, I said, even though I desperately wanted to hear her voice. Just hold on. I'm taking you home. Not home, my wolf said. Pack will kill her. Then where? But before my wolf could answer, the air around us began to shimmer. Light exploded through the clearing, so bright I had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, a woman stood before us. No, not a woman. A goddess. She was impossibly tall and radiant, with hair like liquid silver that flowed to her feet and eyes that held the light of 1,000 moons. She wore robes of starlight that shifted and changed color with every movement. Power radiated from her in waves that made my wolf cower. Who I started to say, I am Selene, she said, her voice echoing like it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The moon goddess. And this child belongs to me. She knelt beside Kira and placed one perfect hand on her chest. The silver marks on Kira's skin began to glow. She was meant to die that night 8 years ago, Selene said softly, and there was infinite sadness in her voice. But I chose her. I awakened her wolf under the blood moon. I marked her as mine, gave her power beyond what normal wolves possess. Then save her, I begged, not caring how pathetic I sounded. Please, I'll do anything. Just don't let her die. Selene looked at me with eyes that saw straight through to my soul. You love her, she said. It wasn't a question, Jess, even though she hates you. Especially because of that, I said. Because her hatred is justified. Because I failed her when she needed someone most. Because I've spent 8 years hating myself for my cowardice. Selene studied me for a long moment. I cannot save her here, she finally said. Her wolf is too damaged. The rejection of the mate bond has torn her spirit apart. My heart shattered. But, Selene continued, I can take her to my realm. I can heal her, train her, teach her to master the power I gave her, make her into what she was always meant to be. Hope flared in my chest. How long? 2 years in your time. Perhaps longer 2 years. It might as well have been an eternity. Will she... I swallowed hard. Will she come back? Selene's expression softened slightly. That, she said gently, will be entirely her choice. I will not force her to return to a place that holds only pain for her. If she chooses to remain in my realm, I will honor that choice. And if she does come back, I asked, even though I already knew the answer would hurt, then you will have to earn her forgiveness, Selene said. Truly earn it, not through grand gestures or hollow apologies, but through genuine change and consistent action. She stood, lifting Kira's unconscious form in her arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Wait, I said desperately. Can I tell her something? Before you take her? Selene considered this, then nodded. I leaned close to Kira's ear. I know you probably can't hear me, I whispered, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know I will spend every day of the next 2 years becoming someone worthy of you. Someone brave enough to fight for what's right. Someone you could be proud to call mate. And if you choose to come back, I'll be waiting. However long it takes. I pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. I love you, Kira Ashford. I think I have from the moment I first saw you in that clearing 8 years ago. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. Selene smiled sadly. Perhaps there is hope for you both, after all, she said. And then they vanished, leaving me alone in the snow with nothing but the memory of silver eyes and the desperate hope that someday, somehow, I might get a chance to make things right. Kira's POV, I woke to the sound of bells. The sky above me was violet and gold, stars hanging so close I could touch them. Silver grass glowed beneath me. Trees made of crystallized moonlight sang in the wind. Welcome, Kira Ashford, a voice said. Selene stood before me, radiant and impossibly beautiful. Silver hair flowed to her feet. Her eyes held the galaxies. Where am I? I asked. My realm, she said. The place between worlds. You were dying, child. Rejecting your mate bond was destroying you. My chest tightened. Riker, he saved you, brought you back from death's edge, begged me to help you. I looked away. I don't want to talk about him. You don't have to, Selene said gently. You're here to learn. I marked you under the blood moon 8 years ago. I gave you power beyond normal wolves. But it's raw, untrained. You've been surviving on instinct alone. She extended her hand. Will you let me teach you? Will you become what you were always meant to be? I looked at her hand, then at her face. Finally, I took it. Yes, the training began immediately. Selene taught me to fight, not like a warrior, but like a force of nature. She showed me how to channel the silver marks on my skin, how to turn them into shields that could deflect attacks, into weapons that could cut through steel, into pure energy that could reshape the world around me. She taught me the ancient language of wolves, songs that could command the elements, call the moon's power, communicate across vast distances. She taught me to move between shadows, to become invisible to mortal eyes, to sense danger before it arrived. She taught me that strength wasn't just physical power. It was knowing when to fight and when to show mercy. It was protecting the weak instead of exploiting them. It was building instead of destroying. You were marked for a purpose, Selene told me one day as we stood on a cliff overlooking an ocean of stars. You're meant to reform what's broken, to bring justice where there's been cruelty, to show your pack a better way. They threw me away, I said bitterly. Why should I help them? Because you're better than they are, Selene said simply. Because someone has to break the cycle. And because children are still suffering there, just like you did. They need someone to fight for them. Her words settled into my heart like stones into still water. She was right that I moved strangely in Selene's realm. Days felt like weeks. Weeks felt like hours. I trained until my body knew the movements without thought, until the power flowed through me as naturally as breathing. I grew stronger, faster, more controlled. The silver marks on my skin spread further, covering more of my body in intricate patterns that glowed brighter with each passing day. I learned to shift faster, to hold my wolf form longer, to communicate with my wolf as a true partner, rather than fighting for control. My wolf had returned, healed by Selene's magic. She was stronger now too, more confident, no longer fading. Are you ready to go back? She asked me after what Selene said was nearly 2 years. I stood at the edge of Selene's realm, looking through a portal that showed the Colorado mountains blanketed in snow. I don't know, I admitted. Selene appeared beside me. You're ready, child. You've learned everything I can teach you. The rest of your journey must happen in the mortal world. What if they reject me again? They won't, Selene said confidently. You're not the helpless child they abandoned. You're marked by a goddess. You carry my authority. They'll have no choice but to listen. She placed her hand on my shoulder. Remember, you're not returning for revenge. You're returning for truth. For justice. For change. I nodded slowly. And Riker? I asked quietly. Selene smiled. That's between you and him. But I will tell you this. He spent every day of these 2 years trying to become worthy of you. What you do with that is your choice. She stepped back. Go now. Kira, show them what a wolf marked by the moon goddess can do. I took a deep breath and stepped through the portal. I emerged on the northern border of Iron Peak territory, exactly where I'd been abandoned 10 years ago. The forest was unchanged. Snow covered everything in pristine white. The mountains rose sharp and cold against a gray sky. But I had changed. I stood tall in robes of silver and white that Selene had given me, my hair flowing like liquid moonlight down my back. The marks on my skin glowed softly, pulsing with power. My silver eyes reflected the winter light. I could feel the pack in the distance, their emotions washing over me like waves. Fear, confusion, anger. They knew something had returned to their territory. They just didn't know it was me. I walked slowly through the forest, deliberately leaving my scent on the wind. Within minutes, I heard howls. Patrol wolves appeared through the trees, a dozen of them in wolf form, surrounding me in a loose circle. They snarled and snapped, trying to intimidate me into submission. I didn't move, didn't react, just stood calmly in the center of their circle. One of them shifted, a young male I didn't recognize, maybe 20 years old. He stepped forward aggressively. You're trespassing on Iron Peak territory, he snarled. Identify yourself or leave. Now. I smiled slowly. My name, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the winter air, is Kira, and I've come home. The young wolf's face went white. The others began shifting to human form, staring at me with expressions of shock and disbelief. That's impossible, one of them stammered. Kira Ashford died 10 years ago. We all know the story. Do you? I asked softly. Tell me, what story do you know? They exchanged nervous glances. That there was a wolfless girl, another said slowly. That she was exiled for the good of the pack. That she froze in the mountains. Is that what they told you? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me tell you the truth. I was 8 years old, a child, and your pack threw me away to die because I hadn't shifted yet. They drove me into the wilderness and left me to freeze. I raised my arms, letting my robes fall back to reveal the glowing silver marks. But the moon goddess had other plans. She marked me under the blood moon. She trained me in her realm. And now I've returned. The wolves stepped back, fear clear on their faces. Tell Alfagarath, I said, that Kira Ashford requests an audience. Tonight, in the Great Hall. And if he refuses, the young wolf asked. My eyes flashed silver. He won't. The Great Hall was packed when I arrived. Every high-ranking wolf in Iron Peak stood in attendance. Warriors lined the walls. Elders sat in their positions of honor. Council members whispered among themselves at this, and that Alfagarath sat on his throne, older and grayer than I remembered. Luna Margot stood beside him, her face a mask of cold fury. And at the back of the hall, partially hidden in shadow, stood Riker Blackthorn. Our eyes met for just a moment. The Mitband flared to life, stronger than ever, flooding me with his emotions: shock, joy, guilt, love, desperation. I looked away before I could drown in them. Kira Ashford, Alfagarath said slowly, his voice echoing through the silent hall. We believed you dead. You wanted me dead, I corrected. There's a difference. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elder Rohan stepped forward, his face twisted with suspicion. This is impossible. The moon goddess doesn't intervene in pack matters, doesn't she? I raised my arms, letting the silver marks glow brighter. Then explain these. Explain how a supposedly wolfless child survived in the wilderness for 8 years. Explain how I stand before you now, marked by Celine herself. Silence fell like a hammer. What do you want? Luna Margot demanded coldly. Truth, I said simply. Acknowledgement of what was done to me. And justice. You were wolfless, Elder Rohan spat. A drain on pack resources. I was 8 years old, I said, and power rolled off me in waves that made wolves throughout the hall drop to their knees. I was a child, innocent. And you sentenced me to death because I didn't shift fast enough for your liking. I walked forward slowly, my footsteps echoing. I have returned to reform this pack, to end the cruelty and corruption that allowed a child to be murdered for the crime of being different. Whether you accept me or not, change is coming to Iron Peak. Alfagarath's jaw tightened. And if we refuse, then I'll go to the Council of Alphas, I said calmly. I'll tell them how Iron Peak exiles children, how you violate Moon Goddess law. How you enough, Gareth said, raising his hand. His eyes were calculating now. What exactly are you proposing? A new law, I said. No wolf under the age of 12 can be exiled, for any reason. Orphans must be properly cared for. Omegas must be protected. And anyone in a position of power who abuses the vulnerable will answer to me. And what gives you the authority? Luna Margot sneered. I let my power flare, filling the room with silver light. The moon goddess herself, I said quietly. Question that. Ecco peril then he felt Italiano, the bond pulling at me, desperate and insistent. I turned. Riker had stepped out of the shadows. His golden eyes were locked on mine. His expression shattered. Kira, he said, his voice rough. Can we talk? Every eye in the hall turned to watch us. That I wanted to say no, wanted to turn away and pretend the bond didn't exist. But Celine's words echoed in my mind. That's between you and him. Tomorrow, I said quietly. Meet me at the northern border, where you found me dying? He nodded, something like hope flickering across his face. I turned back to Alfagarath. I'll return in 3 days for your answer. Choose wisely. And then I walked out of the Great Hall, leaving chaos in my wake. Riker's POV. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Knowing that tomorrow I'd finally get to speak to her, to try to explain, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness I didn't deserve. For 2 years, I'd worked to become someone worthy of her. I'd challenged corrupt warriors. I'd reformed the Enforcer program. I'd protected orphans and I'd stood up to Alfagarath when his orders crossed moral lines. I'd become the wolf I should have been 10 years ago. But would it be enough? She was already there when I arrived at dawn, standing in the exact spot where I'd found her dying, wearing the same silver robe, her white hair flowing in the morning breeze. She looked like a goddess, and I was just a wolf who'd failed her. Kira, I said softly. She turned. Her silver eyes met mine. and the mate bond surged so strongly I had to lock my knees to stay standing. "You wanted to talk," she said. "So talk." I took a breath. "I'm sorry." "That's it!" Her voice was sharp. "2 years? And all you have is, 'I'm sorry.'" "No," I said quickly. "I'm sorry for standing silent when they exiled you. I'm sorry for being a coward. I'm sorry for letting fear of authority matter more than doing what was right. I'm sorry for every day you suffered alone in the wilderness because I was too weak to fight for you." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I was 15, I continued, my voice breaking. "And I know that's not an excuse. I was old enough to know right from wrong, old enough to speak up, but I was terrified of going against the alpha, against the elders, against everything I'd been taught about pack hierarchy." I stepped closer. "But you need to know, your exile broke something in me. I've spent every day since hating myself for my cowardice. And when I discovered you were my mate, when I realized the goddess had bound me to the girl I'd failed to save, ... I laughed bitterly. I knew it was punishment, just as I deserved to spend eternity wanting someone who would never forgive me. "Is that why you saved me?" she asked quietly. "Guilt." "No," I said fiercely. "I saved you because the thought of losing you was worse than death. Because you're mine, Kira. You're my mate. My Oteralf, the piece of my soul I didn't know was missing. I saved you because I love you, and I have from the moment I saw you again by that river." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I've spent 2 years becoming someone worthy of you," I said. "I've reformed the Enforcer program. I've protected the weak instead of bullying them. I've stood up to corrupt authority. I've tried to become the wolf you deserve. I dropped to my knees in the snow, but I know it might not be enough. I know you might never forgive me. And if that's your choice, I'll respect it. I'll never force the bond on you. But please, please at least know that I'm sorry, that I see you. That's you matter." Silence stretched between us. Then she knelt in front of me. "I don't forgive you yet," she whispered. "The wound is too deep, the pain too fresh. My heart cracked. But," she continued, reaching out to touch my face, "I don't hate you anymore. And maybe forgiveness is something we can work toward together, I repeated, barely daring to hope. She nodded slowly. "I'm not ready to accept the mate bond, not yet, but I'm willing to try, to get to know you, to see if the wolf you've become is someone I can trust. That's more than I deserve," I said, covering her hand with mine. "Yes," she agreed, "it is." But she was smiling, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. Kira's POV, the changes came slowly at first, then faster. Alpha Gareth accepted my terms. He had no choice, really. Not with the threat of the Council of Alphas looming over him. Not with half the pack whispering about the moon goddess's chosen standing in their grey hall. Within a month, new laws were established. No child under 12 could be exiled for any reason. Orphans were moved from the Rotting Lodge into the main pack house, given proper rooms and food and education. Omegas were granted protections against abuse. A council was formed to hear complaints about leadership. It wasn't perfect. Change never is. But it was a start. I worked alongside Riker through it all. He'd meant what he said about reforming the Enforcer. Instead of being the Alpha's brutal arm of punishment, they became protectors of the vulnerable. They investigated abuse claims. They ensured the new laws were followed. They served the pack instead of terrorizing it. And Riker, Riker was different than I'd expected. He was patient, kind. He listened when I spoke. He stood back when I needed space. He fought beside me when I needed support. He was becoming someone I could trust. Slowly, carefully, the walls around my heart began to crack. It happened one night, 3 months after my return. We were sitting by the river, the same spot where we'd first seen each other again, watching the moon rise over the mountains. "Tell me about the wilderness," Riker said quietly. "The years you survived alone. I want to know," so Primera told him. I told him about the first terrible winter, learning to hunt and fight and survive. I told him about the cave I'd called home, about the hunters who called me the White Wolf, about the loneliness that ate at me some nights until I thought I'd go mad. I told him about watching the pack from a distance, seeing families together, seeing wolves who belonged, and feeling the ache of exclusion all over again. "I'm so sorry," he whispered when I finished, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry you went through that alone." "I survived," I said simply. "You did more than survive," he said fiercely. "You became extraordinary." He turned to face me fully. "Kira, I know you're not ready yet. I know I have to earn your trust, but I need you to know I will wait however long it takes. A year, 10 years, a lifetime. You're worth waiting for." Something in my chest cracked open. "What if I'm never ready?" I whispered. "What if the damage is too deep? Then I'll still wait," he said. "Because loving you isn't contingent on you loving me back. You're my mate, my purpose. Even if all I ever get to be is your friend and ally, that's enough." I looked at him, really looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, the love written across his face, the way he held himself back, respecting my boundaries even though the bond must be torture for him. He'd kept every promise he'd made. "Riker," I said softly. "Yes, I think I'm ready to try." His breath caught. "Try what?" "The bond," I whispered, not accepting it fully, not yet, but lowering my walls, letting you in, seeing where this goes. "Are you sure?" he asked, even though I could see the desperate hope in his eyes. I nodded. "I'm sure." He reached out slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, and took my hand. The bond flared to life between us. Not the agonizing pull of before, but something warm and right and whole. "I love you, Kira Ashford," he said. "I know," I said. "And maybe someday I'll be able to say it back." "That's enough," he said, smiling through his tears. "That's more than enough." We worked together to transform Iron Peak over the following months. Elder Rohan was removed from his position after an investigation revealed decades of corruption. Luna Margot lost her title when it was discovered she'd been embezzling pack funds. Several warriors who'd abused their power were stripped of rank, and in their place, we built something better. A pack based on compassion instead of cruelty, on protecting the weak instead of exploiting them, on justice instead of blind obedience. It wasn't easy. There was resistance, arguments. Some wolves left unable to adapt to the new way, but others thrived. The orphans smiled now. The Omegos walked with their heads high. The pack felt different, lighter, freer, better. And through it all, Riker stood beside me, not beneath me, not in front of me, beside me, as an equal. As a part, as someone I was learning to love. 5 years later, I stood on the balcony of the pack house, watching the sun set over the Colorado Rockies, and marveled at how much had changed. Iron Peak was unrecognizable from the pack that had exiled me 15 years ago. The orphan lodge had been torn down and replaced with a proper youth center where young wolves were nurtured and trained. The Omega housing had been upgraded. The pack laws had been completely rewritten to protect the vulnerable. We'd become known throughout the region as a sanctuary pack, a place where wolves fleeing abuse could find safety and healing. And I had become their Luna, not through the traditional mating ceremony that had taken 3 years before. I was ready, but through service and sacrifice and genuine care for every wolf under my protection. Alpha Garatha had stepped down 2 years ago, acknowledging that the pack needed new leadership. Riker had taken his place, and I stood beside him as his equal partner. Together, we'd transformed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Riker's voice came from behind me. I turned as he wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. "Everything," I said softly. "How far we've come, how different things are now. Do you ever regret coming back? Eh? Ask it." I turned in his arms to face him. "Never. Even after everything. Especially after everything," I said. "Because I didn't just survive, Riker. I became someone who could protect others the way no one protected me. I became someone who could change the system that broke me. He cupped my face gently. You became extraordinary. We both did, I said. Together. He smiled, that soft, genuine smile that still made my heart skip after 5 years. I love you, Kira Ashford Blackthorne, he said. I love you too, I whispered, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. We stood together as the moon rose over the mountains, the same moon that had awakened my wolf 15 years ago, the same moon that had marked me as something special. I thought about the 80-year-old girl who'd been left to die in the snow, the terrified child who'd believed she was worthless and broken. If I could go back and tell her anything, I'd tell her this. You are not useless. You are not cursed. The pack was wrong about you. The moon goddess chose you for a reason. And one day, you will return to that pack, not as a victim, but as their Luna. You will protect children like you. You will reform the system that tried to destroy you. You will find love with the boy who once failed you. And together you will build something beautiful. You were never meant to freeze in that snow. You were meant to burn. You were meant to rise. You were meant to become. Beneath the silver moon, surrounded by the pack that once tried to bury me, I finally understood my purpose. I wasn't marked by the moon goddess to seek revenge. I was marked to bring change, to break cycles, to prove that the discarded and forgotten could become powerful beyond measure. I was Kirash for Blackthorn, Luna Vian Peak Pack, chosen of the moon goddess, and this was just the beginning.